Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of betrayal felt like fiction, until it wasn't? It's strange how the deepest cuts don't come with noise. They arrive in silence, in the form of a message at 1:13 a.m. while you're lying in a hotel bed halfway across the world, watching city lights flicker through blackout curtains. That's when I read the words that ended a 21-year marriage. You won't be coming back home. I've changed the locks and moved. Everything. Don't bother calling. The message came from Melanie, my wife, the woman I met when I still believed that love, loyalty, and long-term sacrifice could never be hacked. I was wrong. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 49 years old. And while I've spent most of my professional life protecting companies from cyber attacks, I never imagined that the biggest breach would come from my own living room. That night in Singapore, I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel angry. I just got up, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window, knowing two things for certain. 1, this wasn't impulsive. 2, she had no idea who she was trying to outmaneuver. What followed wasn't revenge in the way movies tell it. It was colder, quieter, and far more precise. And if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, I invite you to stay with me. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about clarity, control, and reclaiming your own narrative. If any part of this hits close to home, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. You never know who needs to hear that they're not alone. Let me show you what happens when silence fights back. Back when we met, Melanie wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads in a room, but she was the kind who could hold someone's gaze once she had it. She had a quiet elegance, the kind you only notice when the noise dies down. I was 28, newly certified in digital forensics, and building a modest reputation consulting for small firms. She was 26, studying architectural design and working part-time as a studio assistant in Austin. We met at a friend's engagement party, a night I almost skipped. She talked about Japanese minimalist homes with a passion that made concrete sound poetic. I remember thinking, if she can make brutalism sound romantic, maybe she's someone worth knowing. We didn't fall in love like lightning. It was more like low tide, slow, steady, inevitable. We married 5 years later. No dramatic proposal, no ring hidden in dessert, just two people who believed in structure, in logic, in commitment. We bought a small house in South Austin, a fixer-upper by most standards. I installed the wiring myself. She drew the plans, for the kitchen we couldn't yet afford. Every choice felt like building something together. By the time we had our daughter Sophia, I'd already begun traveling for work. My cybersecurity contracts had scaled into global clients, governments, Fortune 500's high-net-worth individuals terrified of digital intrusion. My schedule became intense. 3 weeks away, 1 week home. Melanie said she understood. She was always practical that way. You protect the outside, she once told me. I'll protect the inside. It worked. Or so I thought. The thing about erosion is it doesn't make noise. You don't hear the foundation cracking until one day the whole structure shifts beneath you. The first signs weren't dramatic, just slightly off kilter. She stopped asking when I'd be back. Our texts grew shorter, less curious. Sophia turned 13 and started talking more to her friends than to either of us. Melanie redecorated the guest room without telling me. Felt like it needed air, she said. I noticed her spending more time on her phone, but I dismissed it. Who wasn't glued to a screen these days? I rationalized her distance with logic, as men like me tend to do. We assume systems run until they crash. We forget sometimes it's the user that corrupts them from within. One memory sticks, the spring before the end. I had just come back from an assignment in Zurich. I walked into the house and the scent was different, like someone else's perfume clung faintly to the hallway. The walls were painted a soft taupe. The art was abstract, impersonal. I joked, "Did we hire a hotel designer?" Melanie smiled and kissed my cheek. It was time for something new. There were no photos of us in the living room anymore. Still, I didn't push. I assumed it was a phase. I told myself the years wear down novelty. that after 2 decades, routine was the price of stability. But underneath, I was starting to sense something colder. She'd begun locking her laptop, hiding her phone when I entered the room. I chalked it up to privacy. We were adults. We trusted each other, didn't we?
One night, unable to sleep, I walked into the kitchen and found her on a video call. She didn't notice me at first. Her voice was softer, almost flirtatious. I cleared my throat and she shut the laptop so fast I thought she'd cracked the
Screen. Work call, she said, design firm in Madrid. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That was the first time I felt it. Not jealousy, just a shift. Like someone had changed the locks in a house I still lived in. After that night, I began watching more carefully, but I didn't confront. I observed. That's the curse of men trained to find patterns. We eventually do. Still, nothing prepared me for the morning. Sophia asked, "Why didn't you come to Mom's gallery opening last weekend?" I froze. "Gallery?" I asked. "She said you were too busy." Melanie had told me she was in Dallas with her sister. I smiled at Sophia and said nothing. That night, I opened a folder on my encrypted drive titled Contingency Alpha. It was a framework I'd built years earlier for clients, a digital blueprint of asset protection in case of internal compromise. I never thought I'd be the one to use it. And yet, there I was, encrypting backups of our financial records, documenting network logs, reviewing access logs from our smart security system, all of it beneath the surface, all of it quiet. Because when the person who shares your home starts erasing the version of you that existed there, silence becomes your only weapon. I wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but I had already begun preparing for war. Not the loud kind, the kind that moves through ones and zeros, through metadata, through time-stamped truths that never blink. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, is that Melanie's betrayal was already months in motion. Her decisions weren't emotional, they were strategic, and soon I would see just how far she was willing to go to take everything. The moment it all shifted was so quiet, so unassuming that most people would have missed it. It came during a routine system audit I ran from my hotel room in Berlin. Just habit, really. I'd built custom network monitoring tools for our home, smart locks, thermostats, even the fridge had digital access. But what caught my eye wasn't the devices, it was the IP. Someone had remotely accessed the admin panel from an unknown location at 2:14 a.m. Austin time. It wasn't me. It wasn't from our home network. I dug deeper. The login credentials used were mine. But the device signature didn't match any of my usual equipment. Someone had cloned my credentials. A man spends his life designing firewalls, and sometimes he forgets the ones needed closest to home. That night, I stayed up reconstructing the access path, line by line. The login trail led to a MacBook Pro registered to Melanie under a shell user ID she'd never mentioned. And from that machine, over the last 4 months, she had been accessing financial dashboards I thought she'd long forgotten existed, accounts I used for digital royalties, consulting residuals, and private investments. Some held offshore, some in domestic trusts I'd only ever discussed with one person, my attorney, Henry Grant. It got worse. She wasn't just snooping. She was moving funds. Carefully, subtly, not enough to trigger alerts. Just small monthly transfers to an account registered to a new LLC, Kane Urban Design Group. I'd never heard of it. A simple public records search revealed the directors, Melanie Walker and Bryce Kane Bryce. The name alone told me everything I didn't want to know. I remembered him vaguely. Young, mid-20s, smooth talker, had helped consult on her pop-up gallery last spring. I'd shaken his hand once, nothing firm about it. A man who smiled too much, a man who asked too few questions. At first, I wanted to confront her, ask, accuse, maybe even rage. But then I remembered what I always tell my clients. Emotion leaves fingerprints, strategy leaves none. So I went silent. I copied everything. Logs, screenshots, IP records, financial trails. I even accessed the metadata of their shared Google Docs. They were drafting contracts, planning real estate acquisitions, setting up transfer accounts. She wasn't just preparing to leave, she was already gone. Emotionally, strategically, legally, she had started the divorce without the paperwork. I needed help. Not friends, not family. Someone who understood systems. So I wrote to Henry, my attorney for the last decade. One sentence. Activate Firewall protocol. He replied, 5 minutes. Later. Already monitoring the trust. Hold position until confirmation. Do not confront. Firewall wasn't just a defense. It was a plan I'd built with Henry years ago after consulting on a case where a tech CEO lost 70% of his net worth. In a divorce he never saw coming. That man had trusted love, I had trusted precedent. The plan involved a limited liability trust registered in Delaware, structured so that 85% of my intellectual property earnings flowed through protected channels. All legal, all disclosed, but nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for, and Melanie didn't know. But she was getting close. What she did know, I'd later learn, was how to forge digital documents. I uncovered a PDF copy of a power of attorney file that bore my electronic signature, supposedly authorizing her to handle our home equity refinance. I'd never seen it, never signed it. She had scanned an old doc, copied the vector of my signature, and applied it to a new form. I cross-referenced the timestamp of the PDF creation with our calendar. That day I'd been delivering a keynote in Tokyo, publicly. It wouldn't take much to prove I wasn't involved. Still, the clarity of her planning shook me. This wasn't a woman acting on impulse or heartbreak. This was the architecture of quiet ambition, designed by someone who had watched me long enough to replicate my moves, use my own systems, twist them into her advantage. There was even an active inquiry from a real estate firm in Madrid, requesting my signature on a listing agreement for our Austin home. She was planning to liquidate it under market value for a fast sale. I hadn't been consulted, and there was Bryce, attached to every document, every transaction, every hidden step. But here's the thing she underestimated. While she had been moving in shadows, I had spent 2 decades building digital footprints that could resurrect every byte she tried to erase. I installed a cloaked backup system on her laptop using a remote exploit. It recorded keystrokes, mirrored file movements, and periodically sent snapshots of her desktop to a secure drive I controlled offshore. I watched in real time as she opened property records, listed our house for private sale, and transferred residuals from one of my side consulting firms to her new LLC. Still, I waited. Because in every game of strategy, the most dangerous move is not when you strike, it's when you reveal that you've been watching all along. One late night from my Berlin hotel, I watched a live feed from our front door camera, Melanie unlocking it with a code I hadn't shared. Bryce stepped in, behind her holding a bottle of champagne. I muted the stream and stared at the screen, the blue hue of betrayal reflected in my eyes. The next morning I sent one encrypted message to Henry. Next phase? His reply came immediately. Full deployment. Freeze all movable assets. Monitor for digital counters. This will get dirty. And so the quiet part of the war ended. The rest would be done in daylight, in courts, on paper, with facts so sharp they'd cut without noise. I wasn't just going to stop her, I was going to let her fall on the very system she tried to use against me. There's a certain calm that settles in once you accept the truth. When denial burns off and all that remains is clarity. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity or betrayal of trust. What Melanie had done was systematic, calculated. She wasn't leaving a marriage, she was executing an extraction. And I was the asset. In the following days, Henry and I deepened the forensic audit. What we found eclipsed even my worst expectations. Over the last 14 months, Melanie had transferred a total of $354,000 through a mix of joint account withdrawals, business expense reimbursements to her fake LLC, and small checks written out to third-party contractors that didn't exist. All of it had the same endpoint: Kane Urban Design Group, a shell. We traced the money to a private bank in Madrid under Melanie's maiden name. She hadn't just been planning to leave, she had already gone international. What made it more chilling was the pattern of it all. Transfers were done on dates that mattered to us, our anniversary, Sophia's birthday, Christmas Eve, as if she wanted to make sure I never saw them coming, never suspected a thing. Henry said, "This wasn't an affair. It's financial espionage." She'd used her access to our shared tax folders to get into our encrypted vault. From there, she had duplicated old legal documents and used a forged version of my digital signature to file a new power of attorney with the county clerk's office. The notary signature? Faked. We confirmed with the listed notary that they had never met either of us. With that forged document, she refinanced our home, pulling $160,000 in equity and using it as a down payment on a property in Valencia, Spain. She also opened 2 new credit lines in my name, cards I hadn't authorized, and racked up over $48,000 in charges. Travel, luxury furniture, a retreat in Tulum. And Bryce Kane wasn't just a charming freelancer. He had a trail. Henry hired a private investigator to dig into Bryce's background, and what came back was damning. 3 aliases, 2 past fraud allegations, both dismissed for lack of evidence, and 1 chilling detail. Bryce had once been a person of interest in the suspicious death of a woman's ex-husband. A car accident late at night on a dry road. No witnesses. Nothing was ever proven. But the proximity of his relationships to destruction was a pattern too strong to ignore. This wasn't love. It was a coordinated campaign. Melanie had filed an ex parte motion in Texas court, claiming I had abandoned her emotionally and was financially manipulative. She attached edited screenshots of our email exchanges, out-of-context texts, even a snippet from a therapy session where I'd once said, "Sometimes I feel numb." She'd claimed this proved I was emotionally abusive. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I had installed a backdoor into all our shared cloud systems years ago, after advising a tech executive whose wife erased an entire paper trail overnight. I had every file, unedited, with timestamps and access logs. I had the receipts. The day after we confirmed the identity of the bank account in Madrid, Henry filed an emergency injunction to freeze all assets under Melanie's name, including the LLC. Within 24 hours, the bank responded, alerting her that the account was under review for suspicious activity. That's when she panicked. She tried, calling me for the first time in months. I didn't answer. Her voicemail started polite, then confused, then agitated. "There's been some kind of mix-up," she said in one. "Can you call the bank and tell them it's a mistake?" Then came the message that sent ice through my spine. "I need you to call them, Ethan. They won't release the money unless you verify it in person. Please. I know we're not in a good place, but you're still my husband." She was desperate, not because she missed me, but because she needed me to bail her out. What she hadn't figured out was that her entire digital life was already being copied and cataloged. Henry had court orders ready. Bryce's name was now linked to an active investigation. The web was tightening. But the final straw was what she did next. Melanie filed a temporary restraining order against me in family court, claiming I had digitally stalked her, threatened her financial autonomy, and was capable of emotional volatility. She wanted me removed from our property and barred from contacting her or Sophia. It was an attempt to take the house, silence me, and flip the narrative in one move. We responded within 48 hours. Henry filed a motion to dismiss with location data from my travel history, passport stamps, and live flight records that proved I hadn't been in the country for the duration of the alleged abuse. We included server logs showing Melanie had accessed my email, not the other way around. And we submitted a digital packet of communications between her and Bryce, pulled from her synced iCloud account, an account she hadn't realized was still connected to our family's master plan. In those messages, they joked about how I still thought I was in control, about how he'll never see this coming, and most damning of all, one text from Bryce. "If he dies in an accident on one of those trips, it's just a bonus. Those contracts come with insurance, right?" Melanie replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was no longer a divorce. That was conspiracy. We sent the entire file to the district attorney. Henry looked at me across his desk and said quietly, "We're not just fighting for assets anymore. We're filing criminal charges. That's when I realized the truth. This hadn't been a love story gone cold. It had been a long, quiet assassination of a life. She had been erasing me, emotionally, legally, financially, step by step, like a digital ghosting campaign. Bryce was the cleaner. I was the mark. But she miscalculated one thing. She thought I was asleep. She thought I'd never see the signs. She forgot I built systems meant to survive breach after breach, and now, I wasn't just prepared, I was activated. The next phase wouldn't be played behind screens. It would unfold in real space, real time, and she would feel every piece of the plan she'd tried to use against me. Fold inward, collapse, and turn. I landed in Austin under a false itinerary. My return flight, according to public records and my company's calendar, wasn't scheduled for another 9 days. That detail mattered. Melanie needed to believe I was still giving a keynote in Seoul. She needed to feel safe, unwatched, unchallenged. Which is exactly why Henry had insisted I fly back quietly, using a private charter under a corporate alias tied to a silent holding entity we'd created years ago. My sister picked me up from a private hangar in a borrowed SUV and said only one thing: she doesn't know. No, I replied, not yet. We drove in silence most of the way. It was surreal seeing Austin again, not as home but as contested ground. The city hadn't changed, but everything else had. I wasn't coming back to reclaim my life. I was here to observe the wreckage, up close, like returning to a building you designed only to find someone tried to knock it down from the inside. That night, I stayed at my sister's house in Terrytown. Lights off, blinds drawn. I spent hours reviewing the court files, evidence, packets, synced drive footage, and voice messages Melanie had left in the past 48 hours. There was one that stood out, her voice shaking as she tried to sound composed. "Ethan, please. I know you think something's going on, but it's not what it looks like. Bryce was just helping me set up my business. This money, it's still ours. You just don't understand what I've been going through." No apology, no admission, just an appeal to doubt. At 7:43 a.m. the next morning, Henry sent a secure text. "All teams in place. Sheriff's office en route. ETA 8:55. I logged into the live feed from the security cameras I'd installed 3 years ago, cloud-linked, encrypted, and forgotten by Melanie. The front yard was quiet. Then, at 8:02, movement. Bryce. In a t-shirt from a resort in Cabo, drinking from a mug that used to sit in my office. He walked barefoot across the porch and sprawled into one of the chairs I'd hand-built out of reclaimed oak. At 8:11, Melanie appeared. She was pacing, phone in hand, expression tight. She looked disheveled, not like someone on vacation or starting fresh, like someone unraveling. I watched as she loaded boxes into the back of her SUV, picture frames, decorative sculptures, my vinyl collection, heirlooms. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about history. At 8:44, a moving truck rolled up right on time. I stood behind a tinted window at my sister's SUV across the street, parked under heavy tree cover. I watched as 3 movers approached the front door. Then at 8:55 sharp, an unmarked county vehicle arrived. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out along with a court officer carrying a folder of documents that weighed more than just paper. Inside, a temporary restraining order against Melanie, a criminal fraud complaint, a court order freezing all assets, and a formal notice of divorce proceedings citing forgery and conspiracy. As the officers approached the front door, I stepped out of the SUV and stood on the edge of the sidewalk. She answered the knock with an irritated expression, expecting perhaps a delivery dispute. That changed the moment they introduced themselves. "Mrs. Walker, we are here to serve you with a court order and multiple legal notices. You are required to remain on site while we complete the documentation." Confusion gave way to fear. She looked over their shoulders and saw me, our eyes locked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Bryce came to the door behind her, shirtless, looking dazed. He wrapped one arm around her waist, trying to appear defiant. That's when I stepped forward. Morning, I said evenly. Didn't expect to be home this soon. You're supposed to be in Asia, Melanie whispered. I was, but I didn't want to miss this. The officers handed them the documents. Bryce skimmed the first few pages, his face draining of color as he hit the section labeled potential criminal charges. You can't do this, he snapped, stepping forward. She's afraid of you. You manipulated her for years. The court dismissed your false abuse claims yesterday, I replied calmly. Judge found your texts about insurance accidents particularly interesting. His jaw clenched, but his eyes darted to the deputy nearest him. Melanie started crying. Whether it was performance or panic, I couldn't tell anymore. Ethan, I didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I was just trying to protect what we built. I didn't know how to tell you. I looked past her to the moving boxes, the open liquor cabinet, the brand new suitcase packed and ready to vanish. You were going to sell our house without telling me. Empty our accounts, flee the country. You knew how to tell me. You just chose not to. The court officer stepped in. You are allowed to take personal items only. Clothing, toiletries, personal medical items. All other assets remain in place until court inventory is complete. Melanie tried to speak again, but I turned and walked back to the SUV. She called after me. Where are you going? I didn't answer, because she already knew. She wasn't asking where I was going. She was realizing she had nowhere left to go. Back. In the car, my sister handed me a coffee. Neither of us spoke for a long moment, then she said, You were right to wait. She never saw it coming. She thought I was on a plane, I said. She thought you were still hers, she replied. As we pulled away, I looked back once. Bryce was standing in the driveway, scrolling through his phone with a look of sheer disbelief. Melanie sat on the steps, cradling her face in her hands. The movers were being turned away. The world they'd tried to build with pieces of mine was collapsing. And I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt still. And I knew. This was the beginning of the real separation, not the legal one, the one that happens when you finally stop needing answers and simply walk away. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the house, I walked into the Travis County courthouse, not as a husband trying to save a marriage, but as a man finalizing the disassembly of something that had already been destroyed long ago. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where lives are redrawn in black ink. I sat beside Henry, my attorney and now the man who knew more about the intimate mechanics of my life than any friend ever had. Across from us sat Melanie. She wore a charcoal blazer too, stiff for her frame. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun and her eyes flicked downward every time she sensed I might be looking. To her right, her attorney, a man I knew by reputation as sharp but expensive. I wondered how she was paying him. Then I remembered the offshore account we'd frozen 2 weeks earlier. The clerk called our case number, and Judge Deborah Carver entered. 61 years old, former criminal prosecutor and famously intolerant of nonsense in her courtroom. Henry leaned in. She doesn't like theatrics. Keep your face calm, no reactions. The proceedings began with Melanie's attorney outlining her claims: emotional abandonment, coercive control, financial manipulation. He told the judge I had built a digital cage around her, that I withheld financial transparency, and that her attempts to independently flourish had been met with resistance. He presented printouts of carefully selected emails, snippets of therapy notes, and a statement Melanie had written describing a sense of suffocation that lasted for years. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't sting, it did, but because I had seen all of this coming. Then it was our turn. Henry stood and calmly projected a series of time-stamped exhibits. He began not with opinion or character defense, but with pure fact. Travel logs that proved I had been out of the country for 214 days over the last 12 months. These weren't vague vacation photos or passport stamps. They included airline itineraries, hotel invoices, conference schedules, and time card entries from international clients. The goal was simple: to destroy the foundation of her domestic abuse narrative by proving I wasn't even physically present. Next came server logs from our home network, showing Melanie logging into shared accounts using forged credentials. We displayed metadata from the power of attorney she submitted to the refinancing office. It was digitally signed using a cloned image of my signature, cut from an old insurance form I'd filled out 5 years ago. We had the notary's affidavit, confirming she had never met Melanie, never signed that form. The judge leaned forward. "You're alleging forgery of legal documents filed with a public institution?" "We are, Your Honor," Henry said, "and we have independent verification." Then came the hammer, a folder of messages from Melanie and Bryce, retrieved from her iCloud account, which she had unknowingly synced to the family master profile years earlier and never removed. Every device she used, phone, laptop, tablet, had been sending backups to my secure server for months. The messages were devastating. "He still thinks I'm worried about his schedule. If he only knew. Insurance policies are legit. If he slips, it's not even suspicious. Imagine him stuck on a plane while we're sipping sangria in Spain. He's so addicted to control, he won't see the power shift coming. And the worst, if he dies on one of these trips, we don't even need to ask." The room went dead quiet. Judge Carver took off her glasses. "Mrs. Walker, are you aware of the penalties for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud?" Melanie's attorney paled. He leaned in, whispering urgently. She said nothing. Her mouth was slightly open, her hands twitching against the wooden table. The judge continued, "This court will not address potential criminal charges. That is the district attorney's responsibility. However, for the purpose of this hearing, the implications are clear." She flipped through the rest of the exhibits. Wire transfers to the Madrid account, the fake LLC used to funnel marital assets, the listing agreement for our Austin home signed without my knowledge. Henry had built the timeline with surgical precision. Each act of deceit layered methodically, leaving nothing to interpretation. "I've seen many cases of financial misconduct in divorce," the judge said, "but this is a clear instance of premeditated asset misappropriation." Her verdict came swiftly. The house remained solely in my name. All assets transferred by Melanie over the last 14 months were to be returned or held in escrow. Spousal support. Denied. Her LLC, frozen, and all evidence of forgery and conspiracy. Was formally referred to the district attorney's office for criminal review. As we stood to leave, I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not even vindication, just space, emotional oxygen. The kind you don't realize you've been starved of until your lungs start to fill again. Melanie approached me in the hallway, her lawyer trailing behind her, already typing on his phone. "Ethan," she said softly, "can we speak, just you and me?" I looked at her. The woman I'd once married, the woman I'd once protected, with everything I had. "There's nothing left," I said. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. Henry leaned in again as we walked out. "By the way," he said, "Bryce withdrew all the money in her private account last week. Took the last of her jewelry too. She filed a police report yesterday." Of course he did. People like Bryce don't commit. They infiltrate, extract, and disappear. Melanie had sacrificed everything for a man who was never planning to stay. She bet against me, and lost. I didn't look back. Not because I was cold, but because some chapters don't deserve a second read. That courtroom wasn't where my story ended. It was where hers did. After the ruling, I didn't go back to the house in Austin. I'd already signed the papers to sell it. Not out of spite, but because some places absorb too much history to be called home again. The oak floors I'd laid by hand still bore the marks of furniture we'd moved in together, of the stroller wheels that once carried our daughter. But now, all I saw in every corner was absence. Every laugh remembered was eclipsed by the silence that followed. You don't rebuild peace in a place haunted by betrayal. You go somewhere new. I drove north to a small cabin near Lake Superior, tucked deep in the woods of Minnesota. I'd bought the land 5 years ago through Winterlight Holdings, one of the quiet asset shelters Henry had helped me set up long before any of this began. Melanie never knew it existed. It was mine in the purest sense, untouched, unshared, undiscovered. The cabin sat on 40 acres of pine, with no neighbors in sight, and the kind of cold silence that makes you hear yourself again. The first week, I slept more than I had in months. No calls, no notifications, just wind moving through trees and the occasional howl of distant coyotes. I split wood in the mornings, cooked in silence, and drank coffee by the fire as the sky turned to ash and then ember each evening. The second week, I built a new bookshelf, something small, made from maple. I milled myself. I didn't need it, but the act of creating something stable with my hands felt like a kind of reset. Building, after all, was how I had always healed. I wasn't trying to replace what I lost. I was rediscovering what I'd ignored, myself. Sophia came to visit on the third weekend. We didn't talk about her mother. We just walked the trails, made pancakes, and watched movies like we used to when she was little. She asked me once, quietly, if I hated Melanie. I told her the truth. No, I don't hate her, but I don't miss the version of her that forgot who we were. She nodded. Kids know more than they say. After she left, I sat on the porch swing I'd finished that morning, sipping bourbon as the sun set. The sky turned to watercolor, orange and lavender melting into the horizon. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. One afternoon, an envelope arrived, forwarded through Henry. Inside was the final set of dissolution papers for Winterlight Holdings. The company's purpose was complete. Assets had been transferred, taxes paid, records closed. I held the paperwork in my hands for a moment before burning it in the fireplace. Some structures don't need preservation. They just need closure. Melanie, I heard, had moved to Tulsa to live with her sister. She took a job in retail. The DA had opted not to press full criminal charges, instead offering a plea deal, 5 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a financial ethics course. She'd never repay what she'd taken, but she'd never rebuild what she lost either. As for Bryce, he disappeared. Word was, he resurfaced briefly in Scottsdale, courting a recently divorced physician, 15 years. Older, a familiar pattern. The next woman wouldn't know until it was too late. I briefly considered reaching out, warning her, but I let it go. Some storms aren't ours to chase. The irony was that all Melanie had tried to take from me, security, legacy, control, was already out of her reach the moment she believed I wouldn't notice. But I had, not with rage, not with chaos, but with the quiet patience of a man who builds systems designed not just to function, but to survive sabotage. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone closing a door behind them and not turning back. And that's what I did. I closed the door. That night, I sat by the fireplace, the last of the autumn wind rustling through pine needles outside. The bourbon in my glass caught the firelight just enough to glow. For the first time in over 2 years, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel responsible. I didn't feel like someone trying to hold something together that had long since unraveled. I just felt still. I just felt free. Looking back now, with distance and clarity, I understand that the betrayal I went through wasn't unique. It felt personal, yes, intimate, surgical even. But over the last year, I've come to realize just how many men carry similar stories quietly. Stories they never share, stories they swallow because the world expects them to be unshakable. And that's why I decided to tell mine. Not for pity, not for revenge, but to offer a kind of blueprint for anyone who's been blindsided by someone they trusted with everything. You see, there are 3 types of betrayal a man can face. The first is sudden impact, the moment it all falls apart in one clean break. It hurts, but it's fast. The second is emotional erosion, slow, silent detachment over years, until you wake up and realize you've been living with a stranger. And the third, the one that nearly undid me, is engineered extraction, when someone plans your disappearance from their life step by step, while still smiling across the dinner table. That one cuts the deepest, but I want to make this clear. Surviving betrayal doesn't mean becoming bitter. It doesn't mean building walls so high that no one gets in. It means learning. It means adapting. It means protecting what you build, not out of fear but out of wisdom. So here are 5 rules I've learned. Quiet rules of emotional self-defense for men like us. First, don't react immediately. Observation is your most powerful weapon. People reveal themselves when they think you're not watching. Second, document everything. Not just legally, but emotionally. Keep a record of how you feel, what changes, what doesn't. Memory lies when pain is fresh. Third, have a private legal strategy. Even in love, even in peace. You can love someone with your whole heart and still have a will, a trust, and a firewall. Fourth, understand that your silence can be stronger than their scream. Let the world see who they really are. You don't need to narrate the chaos. You just need to survive it. And fifth, don't rebuild out of spite. Rebuild out of vision. Let your next chapter be shaped not by what broke you, but by what you've chosen to create. Today, I live in a place I built myself, with my hands, with my mind. No court can take that. No betrayal can touch it. And if you're in the middle of your own collapse, whether it's fresh or long behind you, remember this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you decide to do next. And if you've listened this far, if any part of this story reflected something in your own life, I'd like to hear from you. Share your story in the comments, or just say what you wish someone had told you when you needed it most. Because sometimes healing starts with being heard, and if this resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel, hitting like, or sharing this with someone who's still piecing themselves back together. You never know whose silence you might help break.